Hello and welcome to the Marquette Food Co-op's cooking classroom virtually. My name is Sarah Monty and I'm the outreach director here at the co-op, and today we're going to make a simple potato kale curried roll. So what are we going to start with here? First of all, let's talk about what our produce is going to be. One of the most important things with cooking is to do what is called mise en place. Now this French term refers to having everything in its place. Everything is prepped and chopped and ready to go so that you're not chopping something frantically when it's time to put it in the pan. While it might be French, the Indian-inspired curry that we're making today, it's so important for that cuisine as well to think about mise en place, because sometimes things are only cooking for a few seconds and you have to be ready with your next ingredient. So first of all, let's talk about what we're going to do to prep our produce. Ahead of time, I chopped up some potatoes. These are some little red potatoes. You can also use a Yukon Gold or some kind of yellow potato. If you only have russet potatoes, that's totally fine too. The difference is that the Yukon Gold and the red potatoes will hold their shape a little bit better, so your russet potatoes are softer inside, and so your curry might be a little bit thicker. The potatoes are going to be more likely to kind of dissolve into the sauce a little bit, but that's okay. We're going to eat this on a sandwich anyway, so if it's more spreadable, it works. Use what you've got. But we have these little red potatoes because that's what I had. I have kept them in cold water. I drained them just in time for this video. But if you're doing your mise en place and you started with your potatoes, be sure to submerge them in cold water if you don't want to have browning. The browning's not going to hurt anything, but it might not be as appetizing to your eye to eat it. The other thing that I am going to do before I even start cooking is prep our fresh ginger. Now, a lot of people might not be familiar with fresh ginger. It's a root. It's brown with the yellow inside, and a lot of times I'll have people come to our classes and they talk about peeling their ginger. Well, how do you best peel your ginger? Well, I'm going to tell you right now, I don't. And technically, it started because I was just too lazy to peel it and it seemed like a lot of work. But as I went on my own cooking journey to learn the things that I'm sharing with you, I was taught that you don't need to peel it pretty much ever. In fact, there are some people who believe that there are some important nutritive qualities to the peel. I don't know if that's true, but I certainly don't want to take the time to peel it. For this recipe, you can just use a cheese grater. In fact, for most recipes that call for minced ginger, one of the easiest ways to do it is with a grater. So I'm using the large holes of my grater. I'm just going to take my ginger and I'm going to scrape it. And you can see there's like a little knob that's left. There might be something a little bit stringy. You can see that I peeled, I grated this one earlier. I just won't use that part that's a little stringier. I'll use what came off easily. Once I have it grated, I can gather it together on my cutting board. And if I want it any smaller, I can take my knife to it and it easily goes into smaller pieces. So you can see I have that prepped and ready to go in a bowl. The other thing that I did ahead was dice up an onion into small pieces. Now, a lot of times in Indian cooking, it's traditional to use a red onion, but no one's going to know if you didn't use a red onion. So use whatever onion you have. Yellow, white, red, it doesn't matter. Here I have red onion. I also prepped ahead of time some kale. So if you are not familiar with kale, you should be, because it is so nutritious. I kind of think about it like a superhero of vegetables because it has so many nutritive qualities to it. And there's all different varieties of it. This is a green curly kale. Another reason to love kale is because it loves growing in the UP. So if any of you are visiting local farmers markets, kale is one of those things you're going to find most of the year here in the UP. The only thing about kale is it's actually related to broccoli. And so it has this stem. It's a little softer and thinner than broccoli, but it's very similar in its taste and consistency. It's quite sturdy. So we're going to actually rip the leaves off of our kale, and we're going to cut the leaves separately from the stem. So I'll set this aside. And then I'm just going to cut this into small pieces. Mostly small pieces just because it'll cook fast. And also often I'm trying to sneak the kale into my child's diet, and the smaller I cut it, the less likely she is to notice it. So I cut up this into small pieces, and then to cut your leaves, you're just going to bunch up those leaves. Make sure your fingers are out of the way, and cut the kale one direction, turn it, and cut it the opposite direction. You can leave the pieces bigger if you wish. It's totally up to you. But again, I'm trying to convince my 10-year-old that she's eating a mix of herbs in this dish. So the smaller I can cut up the kale so she doesn't know about it, the better. So I'm going to cut this really small. Again, it'll also cook really fast. If you don't have kale, you can feel free to use other vegetables in this. You could use collards, Swiss chard, spinach. It doesn't matter. Whatever greens you have available can get thrown into this dish. The other thing that I've done is I've measured out all the spices we're going to use today. So let's start by adding our cumin seed. So cumin is what we call a crossover spice. So called because it crosses over to so many cultures. So whether you're cooking Middle Eastern food or Indian food or Mexican food, cumin's probably going to come into play. To the pan here, to cook our cumin seeds, we added some ghee. Ghee is simply clarified butter. It's been slowly heated and then the solid skimmed off the top until you're left with this beautiful amber liquid in your pot. Another similarity between Indian food and French food, who'd have guessed it, they both use clarified butter heavily. So they just call it clarified butter. We think of it in French cooking, but ghee is really the same thing. Now, ghee tastes amazing. It has a very nutty aroma and flavor, and it has what we call a high smoke point. A lot of times with Indian cooking, you're cooking at very high heat. So you don't want to have your heat too high that your butter starts smoking and burns. Ghee will take a lot higher temperatures before it burns. That said, not everybody might want to keep ghee around, and if this is your first time cooking Indian food, you don't need to splurge on a jar of clarified butter. You can go ahead and just use regular butter for this recipe, and it will work just fine. So I'm just slowly letting the butter melt. One rule of thumb that you want to think about for cooking is that butter loves to be put into a cold pan and then you turn the heat on, whereas oil you can put in a pan that's already heating up. The problem with putting butter into a already warm pan is that you might start to get that browning or even burning before you're ready and before it's fully melted. So my ghee has coated the whole pan. And I want you to notice, I have my onions here, they are ready to go. I have my cumin seeds here, ready to go. This is important because I'm going to put the cumin seeds into this ghee and they're only going to cook for a few seconds. What we're trying to do is coax the oils and the flavors out of this dried spice so that the butter itself becomes flavored with it. But if you take it too far and you burn it, that burned flavor is going to go through your whole food. This is a few pennies worth of cumin. If you burn it, start over. Don't worry about it because you're not going to hide it no matter how many other spices you add. So I'm going to make sure my heat is down to sort of a medium-low before I add these. Don't add it to a raging hot pan. I'm literally taking this off the heat and sprinkling the seeds across it. And you can see some of the cumin is turning darker already. You're seeing different colors. If you were here, you would smell the nutty aroma of the ghee and the faint whiff of that cumin in the air as well. So as soon as you start to smell it, it's not just about how long, because everybody might have their stoves at different temperatures or different heats. It's when you smell it. Then I'm going to add the onion. And it's so important that you have that onion ready to go because if you don't, your cumin might burn while you're still trying to scramble around and get your onion into the pan. Now, this is a half recipe, so it'll look a little bit bigger when you're making it a bit fuller in the pan, which will also help to keep it from burning. More onion is good, because as you're cooking the onion, it's actually going to release some of its liquid, some of its water that's in the onion into the pan, which is going to slow down the cooking and keep your cumin from burning. If you're nervous, you also can add a little bit of salt to your onion, and that will help the cell walls open up a little bit more, release a little bit more of that water, and be able to stop the cooking a little faster. We're just going to let this onion soften a little bit, and then we're going to add that ginger that we had. We also have turmeric. So turmeric is a root as well. It looks actually quite similar to ginger, but it's a little bit smaller and skinnier, and it's bright orange inside. And when it is dried and ground to a powder, that's what we're a little more used to cooking with. But that's going to add a signature color that we think of with Indian food, is that bright kind of yellow orange. I also have a little bit of chili powder or cayenne. You can use either one. I'm probably going to use a little bit less because, again, this is something I might be feeding my daughter later. She's not as into the spice as I am. So if you're looking on this website and reading along with the website, or excuse me, with the recipe as you watch this, just know the heat from the chili powder or the cayenne, it's totally up to you to add as much or as little as you want. We also have a little bit of coriander, which is going to add a bright citrusy note. It's another one of those crossover spices that you're going to find in a lot of cultures. It's a very versatile spice to have on hand. The cumin, the coriander, some kind of heat like the chili or the cayenne, I strongly recommend having those in your kitchen. They're good standard spices to have. That said, if you don't have the ability to have a bunch of different spices hanging out in your kitchen, you could substitute with a couple teaspoons of curry powder in this recipe. So I'm just going to stir all this together and try to coat the potato with all the different spices and the ginger. We want each and every one of those pieces of potato to be coated in those spices. And you can see it's a beautiful color. Honestly, you could probably stick those in the oven and roast them with a little extra oil, and they'd also be delicious. But for this, we want those potatoes to soften up. So I'm going to add some water now that I've coated them with the flavored ghee and spices. And I'm going to put a lid on it so that they can steam a little bit. Now, I figure you probably don't want to watch me cook potatoes for 5 to 10 minutes until they're soft. You just keep the lid on that, but pay attention to how much water is in there. It's important to stir it every now and then. Potatoes do love to burn, so you're going to want to make sure to give it a stir and check it. Is it sticking, but the potatoes aren't quite cooked? Add more water. If it's not sticking, you have plenty of water, give it a stir and get that lid right back on there again. I have this at kind of a medium heat, but I'm going to keep an eye on it. Now, earlier, I actually cooked my potatoes fully. They are ready to go, and they're over in this pan so that you can see the next step. So I have some of those kale stems that we chopped up earlier. I'm going to add those first, and I'm going to give it a stir. Now I cut these really small. If you wanted to cut them bigger, you'd want to let the kale stem cook a little bit longer than the leaf, but because I cut these so small, we're probably going to be okay. So I'm just going to go ahead and grab my pre-chopped kale and give that a stir. If your pan seems a little bit dry, that's okay. My pan is a little bit dry. I'm gonna grab some more water because I wanna make sure that the water is in there to help the kale wilt and to make sure that my potatoes don't stick. Sometimes when I'm making a curry, I'll add water multiple times because here's the thing, water cooks out. It's no big deal. You just cook it a little bit longer, you turn up the heat and let it evaporate, and it's just going to help the flavors develop because the longer you can cook your spices, the longer you can make yourself wait before you eat your dinner with a curry, the better the flavors are going to be. Indian food makes great leftovers as well because the flavors actually get even better the next day. But if you're not used to Indian food, if you're nervous about it, this is a great starter recipe. It's not too spicy. It's all ingredients that are easy to find and extremely affordable, and it's going to taste delicious. So we've got our potatoes and our kale cooking over here. And what we're going to do next is we're going to make a little sauce. So when we put this together on our bread, we're going to put a yogurt sauce on it. It's called a raita. They're absolutely delicious. It's just a simple yogurt that has some spices and some produce in it. Now, if you wanted to make this and you didn't have any of the other ingredients except the yogurt, that's okay. You could just put plain yogurt, maybe put a little pinch of salt in there to make it more interesting, right in on top of this roll when we make it. But I'm going to show you what you can do when you have all the full ingredients in front of you. So what do we have here? We have some chopped up cucumber, some chopped up tomato, and some chopped up red onion. I have a bowl of yogurt here, and I'm just going to show you a few cutting techniques before I put this all together. So, how did I cut this cucumber? So first of all, I have to say, I really hate peeling things. There's so many nutrients in the peel that you lose. But this time of year, late spring, the cucumbers are not like the tender, soft cucumbers that you're getting out of your garden in the summer. The peel is quite thick and it's quite bitter. So what do? One trick is to make stripes. So I'm just going to go along this. In one of our children's cooking classes, I was teaching a little boy how to do this, and he said, "Oh, you're making referee cucumber." That's what we call it at our house because it's striped like the referee's jersey. So I just did some stripes so that I still get some of the nutrients from that peel, but I don't have to worry about it being too bitter to actually enjoy my food. So just cutting this in half so that it's easier to work with, and then you're going to cut it in half the long way. Now, some recipes might have you take the seeds out. I say no way, because the seeds also have nutrients in them that you're going to want to eat. And if this sauce gets a little watery from the seeds, that's okay. Basically, what you want to ask yourself is, when a recipe tells you to de-seed, will it hurt the integrity of the recipe to have it be watery? Because this is extremely watery in the seeds. If you're okay with it becoming a little more watery, I wouldn't worry about it. But if you are, one trick you can do is cut the cucumber again the long way, so you're quartering it, and then it's really easy to take your knife and just kind of slice off those seeds. Now, this is still totally edible, so I don't want to waste it, especially after I just told you it has so many nutrients in it. So if I'm worried about it and I took this off, I actually put a little sprinkle of salt on it, and I have myself a little snack of cucumber before I go on with the rest of the recipe. So you can slice that or you can leave it. So you can cut, if you want bigger pieces, you can cut bigger pieces. If you want little tiny pieces, little dice in your raita, that's fine too. In that case, you're gonna wanna cut this in half at least one more time, and then cut them in very small pieces. So you can see these are quite small. I did it a little bigger because I like the little chunks of cucumber in there. We also have fresh tomato. Now, in general, I tell people not to do a whole lot with fresh tomato when you live in the UP and it's April. I'll use canned tomato as much as possible. If a recipe calls for cooking the tomato, you better believe that I'm going to use canned tomato. But for this, every once in a while, it's nice to have a treat and allow yourself a fresh tomato. Now, the fresh tomatoes don't always have a ton of flavor in the UP this time of year. So one thing that you can do is do either a cherry tomato, which is almost guaranteed to have flavor, but can be a little bit pricey, or a Roma tomato. So a Roma tomato tends to have less liquid, so you're not going to have a problem with as much moisture in your dip. So I'm gonna cut this in half. If you have any trouble cutting your tomato, try switching to a serrated knife. If your knives aren't super sharp, a serrated knife can sometimes cut through the skin of the tomato more easily than a non-serrated knife. So I've cut out just that little top where it was attached to the plant and cutting it again. And then as big or as small a pieces as you want. Because Romas are such a dry tomato, you don't have to worry about de-seeding. But honestly, you don't have to worry about it. You're going to be eating this right away. And you can cut this as big or as small as you want. You can keep the seeds or not. If you have a very watery tomato, maybe you'll want to take the seeds out. But if possible, you're going to want to keep them, again, for the nutrients. I also have a red onion that I cut up ahead of time, but I want to show you about cutting an onion. An onion is another one that can be tricky for folks. So I'm just going to take off this edge. Now I have a flat surface to work from. Put that flat surface down, cut this in half. You'll notice I left the root still attached to this. That's just going to help keep the onion from sliding around while I slice it up. So it makes it really easy to peel the onion if you do those steps first. Don't try to peel the whole onion. At least make your half cut and then that peel will come right off. So I want to dice. So I'm going to cut along this grain. You can actually see lines on the onion. And I'm going to cut into that. And you can see I left it a little bit. I didn't go all the way to the root. And now I can control how big or small I want my pieces of onion to be by making my next cut. So I can make them small, like this, or big chunks if I want. It just has to do with where I place the knife. And then as it gets closer, I actually will turn the onion like this and still hold on to that little root to finish slicing up what I can. The final thing that you're going to put in your write-out, I know it seems like a lot of work, but you know what? It's really not that much. It's only 3 vegetables, and then we're going to have our fresh herbs. If you don't have fresh herbs for this, it's okay. It's worth it just to have that little bit of cooling sensation of the yogurt with your curry here. But fresh herbs, if you can get them, are one of the healthiest things you can possibly eat. They have so many nutrients in it, and because they're so flavorful, it makes it so that you're less likely to use sugar, salt, and fat to add flavoring to your food, because you've already added flavor with your herbs and spices. I added some cumin and some cayenne, and I'm going to mix that in my plain yogurt. Don't do a sweetened yogurt for this. This is not dessert, people. You really need to have a plain yogurt. And you don't have to spend money on Greek yogurt. It can just be a regular yogurt. It's a little cheaper and the right consistency. And once I have the spices mixed in and the salt, I'm going to add my onion and my tomato, my cucumber, and my cilantro. If you have a little bit of fresh mint is also a very nice thing to add because this is a cooling dip. So the mint is also cooling, but no worries if you don't. And if you're one of those people who's like, oh, you didn't really put that much cilantro in there, what the heck am I going to do with the leftover cilantro? Put it on every salad you've got. There's another video on this site that teaches you to make a black bean and cabbage taco. You can use your leftover cilantro for that. You can chop some up to garnish your curry with at the end, Or you can just chop it up, and every time you have a green salad, just add any fresh herbs you have sitting around your fridge that are left over. Again, it's going to add flavor and it's going to add nutrition. Your salad's going to taste a lot better with the fresh herbs. So we have a completed curry and we have our completed raita. And like I said, if you don't have yogurt, maybe you only have some sour cream left over in the fridge. That'll work too. The point is to just add a little bit of dairy. You could do a little bit of the leftover feta cheese from our cabbage and black bean taco if you want. Now I have here a very traditional pita, a Middle Eastern style pita. You don't even have to have that. You can use a tortilla. You can even just use some toasted bread. Even the most ardent traditional Indian cook will admit that sometimes a nice slice of bread that's been toasted and buttered is all you need to scoop up your delicious curries. So don't worry if you don't have exactly everything here. Use whatever you've got. So I'm putting a little bit of the mixture in here, and then I'm going to add our raita. If you have a little extra cilantro and you want to garnish it, go for it. Otherwise, you can wrap this up like a burrito or hold it like a taco, and you have a pretty heavy-duty, super filling meal that's also incredibly nutrient dense. I hope you enjoy, and don't be afraid to make any substitutions you need to.